Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Up and Up. I'm Jodi Newell from Real Progress in Action. So I started the show because I wanted to give voice to boots on the ground local activists. Their stories aren't told by the mainstream, and yet they're the heartbeat of the progressive movement. So today's episode could actually be called Portrait of an Activist, because my guest, Bridget Williams, works with the Sunrise Movement and started a local food bank in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She also has door knocked for Bernie Sanders. She has done really amazing things. Welcome, Bridget, to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, I am really excited to talk to you because I have read about the things that you've done, and you're just exactly the kind of person that I want to talk to and would like to lift up. I was wondering, we're going to get into talking about, your activism and the kind of ways that you've helped out in your community. But I'd really like to know a little bit about you. I don't know, what's your story and what brought you to activism in the first place?
Yeah, so I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I feel like, sometimes it takes you a while to kind of understand your own story and to really put it together, but I feel like I came from divorced parents. I came from parents who had to work really hard to put me through the programs I wanted to go through, to get the things I wanted to get, to feed me. To go to college. I'm a first generation college student. And so I just was very aware that not everybody lives the same lifestyle and that there are people who have to work very hard to get to a level that somebody doesn't have to work very hard to get to. So I feel like that was always just a really constant idea in my upbringing. I went to Iowa State University to study community and regional planning. So going into it thinking I would work for a city or a county and do urban planning for them. And while I was there, I did a lot of work to include students in the planning process in the community. Iowa State students make up like 50% of the Ames community, and things were happening in our student-dominated neighborhood where we had no say. I mean, luxury apartments were going up, buildings were being demolished. There weren't bike lanes, even though we have a significant biker population in the community. And so that really started to make me see the other side of this work and doing community-based work that is not necessarily out of a government entity. And so I feel like from there, that's really where I have grown since to look at kind of the third sector, the other way to do things. How do we do things that start on the ground and not necessarily deal with the bureaucracy that's really, rampant in a lot of our government entities.
Right. And so, of course, when you're doing those kind of things, especially, trying to make changes such as, the bike lanes and dealing with what I would assume, or at least what I would characterize as gentrification, putting up these luxury houses and all that kind of stuff. In order to make changes in that way, you do have to work with the bureaucracy, right? So, so it's interesting to kind of understand the one side and then also to understand, well, there's the organizing in the community aspect and things like that. So that's pretty cool. So you started organizing essentially in college.
Yeah, it didn't feel like that, and it's taken me a really long time to be able to even call myself an organizer or an activist. I feel like you have this picture in your head of, I don't know, chaining yourself to a tree, and that just wasn't me. And just like you said, I was working closely with the city, and I was in fact using the system that I understood from my schooling to do my activism work. And so that felt very different than what I had understood activism to be. Mm-hmm. And so, I guess that work was organizing work. It didn't feel like it at the time. It felt very like there was a problem. I knew how the system worked, and I put people together to solve that problem, which is pretty much what organizing is. But,
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. So, I mean, really quick, I mean, thinking about how you defined activism or how you envisioned activism, or both, when you're in college versus, now kind of being involved with it, has that definition changed, or or I guess I would say, I'm sure that it's changed a little bit, but how has it changed?
I think, yeah, my definition of activism really has changed. I still see a difference between what I do and what people do. John Lewis talks about the concept of good trouble. And I feel like I've never really been in good trouble because I've never had any perceived risk with what I was doing. There was never a moment where I thought, oh, I could really get arrested for what I'm doing, or this could really affect my life, and so I feel a difference in that. I look at what the Black Lives Matter movement is doing, and I just see a lot of power and strength and courage in what they're doing. And that's not to say that there isn't in what I'm doing either, but it's still hard for me to see how we're in the same vein, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely feel like whether or not you know how the system works, that doesn't mean you're not an activist. So whether or not you are collaborating with city or state or federal representatives, whether you're using the system to your advantage, that doesn't mean you're not an activist. Being an activist means doing something outside of the normal structures, the normal power structures, in order to do what is right. I think that activism is really creative, and because it's not so easily definable.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times, I don't think that the definition of activism or an activist needs to necessarily be very small, right? I think it can be a broad category, just in the way that you're describing in a lot of these different organizations that take different tactics. A lot of times you have to use every tool in your toolbox to get it done, right? So it takes the people who are out in the streets. It takes the people who are citizen lobbyists. It takes people who are, doing kind of different things. So let's talk about what kind of things did you get involved with first? So what was your so that was while you were in college. And you kind of got a tasty taste, right, of what it's like to organize people, whether you defined it as that at the time or not. And then what was it that really made you start getting involved with more kind of organized political movements, I should say?
Yeah, so I was doing my last semester of school actually from my hometown in Cedar Rapids online. And this would have been a year ago. And I thought, I was only going to be in the city for a few more months as I finished my degree. I really had no intention of getting involved here, planting any roots, making any waves, anything like that. Greta Thunberg came to Iowa City for a big march, and I went to see her speak, and it was like, all of a sudden I was like, what am I doing? I care so much about the climate crisis. I think that it's happening now, and people are dying now today because of this crisis. I think it is a result of corporate and capitalist greed. So it's just not going to be enough for me to go vegetarian and ride my bike sometimes. Like, I need to really step it up and do something about this. And so I went online and I said, who is the environmental group here in Cedar Rapids that I need to link up with? Who's the group that's at the council meetings that's really acting, doing more than just sitting in a room discussing the crisis? I found Sunrise Movement, which is a national organization with over 200 hubs in the United States that is fighting to achieve the Green New Deal on every level. And I became a leader like that. I met up with them for coffee. I went to one protest they were doing against Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley, who came to talk about resiliency infrastructure they were putting in Cedar Rapids, and meanwhile they were failing to do anything about the climate crisis that's going to cause more storms to hit us. And the leader of Sunrise was going off to Europe and needed someone to fill in, and I led the first meeting I attended.
Wow.
Yeah, so it happened very fast. But that's kind of the way I like things to happen. So I started from there, and I really had a mission in my head for the county and city to sign climate resolutions, declaring the crisis and committing themselves to important emissions targets, important environmental justice targets, so ensuring that people who are hit hardest by environmental hazards and disasters are the ones who are prioritized, and resiliency measures. So I utilize those skills that I learned in school and that I learned through my work trying to get students involved in the planning process at Iowa State. And we got a county resolution passed. We held a climate march. I sat in negotiations with the city, and I ended up writing both the county and the city climate resolutions that are now passed today. So that's really where it started, and I can talk about some of the other things I did, but that was really a great accomplishment in my life, was to do that work on the local level.
I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, that's absolutely beautiful. For one thing, I think the serendipitous nature. I mean, the fact that, I mean, I like things that kind of seem like they happen, for no reason, but you realize there's kind of a reason anyway. But, kind of showing up and then being needed right off the bat, and that being your touchstone to, to really jump in, and wow, that's amazing. And the fact that so quickly, something you were able to pass those resolutions, even write those resolutions. I mean, wow. Okay. All right. I'm impressed. I'll try and tone it down. Okay.
I'm really lucky because, Stacy Walker, who's a board of supervisors for Lynn County, is really, he did a lot of things for Bernie Sanders later in the campaign, and he's just a great advocate for progressive issues. And so when we came to him about the climate crisis, he was like, what do we do? And so that really helped jumpstart it. And we had the march, which was really about generating the people power. And yeah, then we were able to do the same thing with the city. And it really was I don't want it to sound easy, because it wasn't an easy process, but it was a really powerful process. And it did show me what my individual power is as an activist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, kind of harkening back to what we were talking about, it takes all kinds, and the using different tools and things like that. That the Green New Deal and the structure for that and all these kind of things, this was laid out, so kind of the ground was laid for you in an interesting way, because it was on a national level, when Sunrise Movement in particular, really made a big deal about it and kind of used different tactics, but then that also fed into, it's really, it's pretty beautiful to see how all these things kind of work together. So, that's beautiful. All right. So I do want to talk about, you volunteered with the Bernie campaign, and I'm curious, was it because you were involved in the Sunrise Movement? I mean, I'm sure it had something to do with because his policies, aligned. But essentially getting involved in the Bernie campaign, was that something that the Sunrise Movement was going out and knocking doors, or was it something that you individually decided to do?
No, so my journey to Bernie, how lame is that to say? But my,
that's pretty cool. You're like,
my journey to getting to the Bernie Sanders campaign was really an individual one. Sunrise did end up endorsing Bernie, but that was way down the line. And actually, we tried to determine at a local level who we were going to support and door knock for, and it wasn't possible. There were too many different opinions within the group. But I actually approached Bernie Sanders not from this, it has to be progressive candidates point of view. It really came from, like I said, when I started out here, I was just doing school, and I was like working a job at a coffee shop, so I had a lot of extra time, and so I went through every candidate. I went through every candidate who's in the Senate. I went through their record. This is like such a nerdy thing to do, but like I really wanted to know who these people were, and I didn't just want to hear what they say in the campaign trail. I wanted to see what they've accomplished in the past, and what they've introduced into the Senate was a really big indicator to me of what they're passionate about. And the only person who really, what they were saying matched up with what they had done, what they had had the opportunity to do while they were in their place of power, was Bernie. And in addition to that, the movement was with Bernie. In addition to that, Bernie was really fighting for Medicare for all, for the Green New Deal, in a much more prominent way than the other candidates were. And he's been working his whole life to accomplish these social justice policies. So it just, once I had all the information, it was like, it didn't make sense for it not to be Bernie Sanders. And from then I really drank the Kool-Aid, you know. So then I was telling everybody why they should support Bernie, why he mattered to maybe not them, but to people on the ground who don't know where they're going to get their meal the next day or how they're going to pay their healthcare bill. I had a really good friend who works nights in healthcare, and her and I would phone bank, door knock, I mean, hours and hours every week. And it would kind of just be, when we would do it together, it would be you know, I'm a climate activist, I work in healthcare, and this is why we think Bernie is the best candidate for the causes that we support. And so I really value that time in my life, and I met a lot of really great people, including Wendy, who connected me with you and connected me with this show. I mean, there were times where I would phone bank and I would get off the phone and I would cry because I was just so emotional about whether somebody on the phone just didn't get what people were going through, and they didn't get that people come from different backgrounds and they don't choose what life they're born into. They didn't get that systemic racism is a real crisis in this world and in this country specifically. And they didn't get that, like, it was because of corporate greed, because of like 90 companies alone that have emitted, have been responsible for 2/3 of emissions since the Industrial Revolution. You know, they don't get that what I'm talking about is a system, is a few wealthy individuals that are pitting us against each other and keeping us, keeping us from succeeding. And so that was really hard. And sometimes I would talk to somebody on the phone who couldn't go caucus because they had to work and they can't get out of work for caucusing, or because they had children and they didn't know how they were going to bring all of their kids to the caucus, because they were worried about where they were going to get food instead of how they were going to get to the caucus on a certain day for multiple hours. So that was a really great and really eye-opening experience for me, was door knocking for Bernie. It was less of a campaign and it was more, this is so obvious, but more of a movement. Yeah.
So in another organization that I'm active with and things like that, what they've been doing is this really in-depth called deep canvassing, right? And having like deep conversations with people. I don't know if you've heard of it before. If you haven't, or if anybody out there hasn't, you should look into it because it's really interesting. But what's really cool about it is it allows you to kind of bridge the divide in a culture that at this point, like political culture, that's become so divisive that it's hard to have conversations like that, right? And so I'm just thinking about, you talking about the conversations that you have and being discouraged afterwards. And I definitely identify with that. What does give me a little bit of hope is kind of this deep canvassing thing, which is why I want to kind of at least bring that up, something to look into, folks. Maybe it'll renew your faith in humanity. I don't know. But I'm curious, did you have any positive experiences? Is there anything that you'd like that you could kind of share with us that was like, that was a good experience that you might have had knocking on doors with Bernie? And, if there isn't, there isn't. I didn't ask you about this in advance, but I'm curious, were there any things like that really were encouraging?
Yeah, I don't know, this maybe doesn't sound like it was an encouraging moment, but I think about it a lot, which is, my friend who I mentioned who works in healthcare and I were knocking doors, and there was a man who we actually didn't knock on his door, but he saw us and he called us over. And he asked who we were knocking doors for, and we said Bernie Sanders, and he started yelling at us. He told us he was a veteran. He told us that we had no idea what it was like to be, to be in service, that we were just kids, and then he started spewing a lot of Democratic talking points at us and attributing them to us and saying that we were, ridiculous and brainwashed. And, I stopped and I said, like, sir, I can't remember his name at the moment, but I said, I want to thank you for your service, and I want to tell you why I'm doing this. And I explained that I wasn't doing this because of all the Democratic talking points that he had just thrown at me, but because my mom is gay and because she couldn't get married until the law said so. But because I was raised in a single income household, where my dad had to work really, really hard to feed me, to give me health care, to ensure I could do the things I wanted to do, to put me through college, that I was doing this because I'm going to have $50,000 of student loan debt. That I'm doing this because there is a climate crisis that is not only going to affect me and affect you, but is going to greatly affect Black and brown people who were put in neighborhoods that specifically will get hit by these hazards and disasters. I'm doing this from a really human perspective, and I was shaking a little bit because I was really emotional, but I wasn't yelling. And I just explained why Bernie mattered to me and why the movement mattered to me. And he didn't have anything to say because it wasn't how he was used to people responding to him. He was used to the talking heads on the news. He was used to the yelling. And so he just said, okay, thank you. And I don't know if that meant anything to him. I don't know if he changed his mind, probably not. But it was at least closer to a human conversation than I had in the past.
Yeah. And I see that a lot as well, with conservative friends and family, is that I feel like we're having a conversation that it's like Fox News versus they think they're having a conversation with like CNN or something. And I'm like, this is not me. Like, but you know what? And in the same way that we were talking about, in a different context, but talking about it kind of taking many different tools, many different ways. There are a lot of times when you can't see what the impact is. You can't necessarily see what the impact of that one interaction was because it takes a lot of different ways. And, if only you were able to break down some type of stereotypical libtard, whatever, like what they expect it to be, yeah, I think that's a great story. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that too.
Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left. So there are a couple things that I want to make sure that we talk about before we're done. And one of them was, could you tell us a little bit about the food bank? Because I know that, just take it away. How's that?
Yeah, so while I was still leader of Sunrise Movement, Cedar Rapids, I also was working as a Green Iowa AmeriCorps member at Matthew 25, which is a nonprofit here in Cedar Rapids that focuses on neighborhood revitalization and giving people the tools to provide for themselves through food, education, and housing. And I, when COVID-19, when lockdown happened, public transit shut down. And so in response to that, I put together a project called the Pantry Pickup Project, where I actually was working with a different food pantry in town to deliver food boxes to people who were homebound. And that process just really opened my eyes to the crisis that people were already in before the pandemic happened. A lot of people, you see a lot of memes and people posting about how 2020 is the worst year, and like, what more can we take in 2020? But really, like, 2020 is an inconvenience for affluent, mainly white people, and it's really just a crisis on top of an already crisis for a lot of people. And so I really realized that through my work. And the nonprofit I was working at specifically focused on the northwest side of Cedar Rapids, which does not have access to fruits and vegetables in the neighborhood. And so I just felt like my nonprofit had an urban farm. We have tools to teach people what to do with food. And we just happen to own a building that we eventually want to turn into a grocery store. And so let's do a food pantry right now. And so I worked with my boss and I led my AmeriCorps team to spruce it up. I connected with various farmers in the community. There's a great organization, Feed Iowa First, that grows produce all over the community. And we connected with them using our own urban farm. We got it started. And it's called Cultivate Hope Produce Rescue. And we have fresh produce. Now it's 3 times a week. I'm no longer a part of it. I got it started. And when my AmeriCorps term ended, I was able to secure a partnership with Advocates for Social Justice, who are the Black Lives Matter organization here. And they do a lot of really important work, just doing work on the ground as well as their activism. And that's something I really take with me. But they help co-run the Pantry with Matthew 25 now. And the Pantry, after the derecho storm that recently hit us in the Midwest, I don't know how many of your viewers will know about it, because there's really been storm after storm after storm lately. But it hit us really hard. And the same thing happened with COVID lockdown, which is that public transit shut down again. So I organized a lot of people to call everybody I had in my database from the Pantry Pickup Project. And we delivered food and essential items all over again. And we ended up delivering like over 200 boxes just within a few days. And this time I pulled from my own pantry that I had started. And so that got a lot of donations from people in the community. And that donation process has kind of continued with the pantry. So now they have food beyond just produce, and they have milk and eggs and cereal and other things that you might need. But the goal with the pantry was really to address one of the environmental injustices, which is food insecurity, that is neighborhood focused, and making sure that there are healthy options available, and that there are recipes in the pantry to tell individuals what to do with the produce if they don't know what to do with it. There are seeds available in order to grow your own produce. That was really the mission of the pantry. And I think that now it's really important to connect that work I was doing as a Green Iowa AmeriCorps member and the work that I do as an activist with Sunrise Movement Cedar Rapids, and merge those together. So one thing that Sunrise Movement Cedar Rapids is doing is actually a farm to food pantry, where we are buying produce from starting farmers who really focus on sustainable and regenerative farming, and we give that to pantries such as the pantry that I started. And the reason that work is so important, no matter what your focus is in your organization, is because if you don't do the work on the ground, you will have no trust or relationship with the people on the ground. I think there's often this conversation that gets had in movements of, well, how do we get people in our movement that we're trying to help? How do we get people who are from different financial or socioeconomic backgrounds and different racial backgrounds into our movements? And the answer is that you create relationships with them by doing the work on the ground that they need. Yep. So I want more than anything for everyone to be on the same page on the Green New Deal. I want everybody to vote in the interest of the Green New Deal. I want everybody to see how it affects their life. But that's never going to happen if I'm not also doing the work to get food in places where there isn't. If I'm not also doing the work to connect with people on the ground and finding out what their needs are. So I think that's a really important element that needs to be added to people's movements.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we just seize for a minute on that word connect, right? The connections that we're building. And, one of the other things that we've seen as as a byproduct of what is happening with COVID and the lockdowns and that kind of stuff. A lot of other things, and you know, I'm not necessarily putting it down to that only, but for a lot of different reasons. I think a lot of people have been dealing with a lot of mental health issues, depression. It exacerbates other mental health issues. When I went to look at your page and just find out a little bit more about you, and Wendy suggested I reach out to you, and I did see some posts on Facebook that were really explaining what you've gone through with your mental health and things like that. And I identify with that as well, having experienced some of that myself. And to see someone speak up about it, I really have a lot of love and respect, honestly, for you for doing that. And if you don't mind, I'd really appreciate if you could talk a little bit about it here, as much or as little as you want to, because I'm sure that some of our viewers out there are experiencing the same thing. And yeah, I think it could be helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, so I've been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and this really affected me when I was in college. I don't even fully understand how I graduated and survived that. Well, I do, actually. It's because my mom really helped me out in that moment, and she got a psychiatrist for me. And the reason I say that is because you always see, like, don't be too afraid to reach out for help. Well, sometimes you really can't reach out for help. I mean, you can't even get out of bed. And so that really saved me. And about a year ago was when I was actually, like, accurately treated for my depression. And it comes in waves when my medication is working and when it's not working. But it's really important for me to talk about it because when it was really bad, you know, when I was in college, I thought, if you told me I was doing all of this now, I would say, no way. I would think there's no way that I was able to be an activist, to be an organizer, to do the work with Sunrise, to do the work starting a pantry. But you can. I just want people to know that, like, people live with these mental health issues and they're still able to live their lives. Like you can survive this, and you can live life to, like, your fullest potential, you know? And it's really important to bring up because even though the stigma is changing, we're not there yet. We're not to the point where we can all really openly talk about this. I mean, I've written about it in a cover letter and was told by somebody who hires people, take that out. Do not talk to somebody who's going to potentially employ you about your mental health issues. It's still there. The stigma is still there. So it's just really important for us to be as open as we can about it and to kind of take a stand and say, like, I'm not going to give anything up for talking about this. And so it's not something that is part of my activism every day, but honestly, me waking up every day and doing the work that I do is, in a way, mental health activism, because I'm saying that I'm not going to let it define who I am. And so I hope that people who are watching this, who are maybe struggling, know that they're going to make it, you know? And I think just either if you're at a place where you can get a therapist, get a psychiatrist, do it. And if you're at a place where you can't, reach out to somebody close to you that's in your network. And honestly, I'm dealing with depression right now, and something that's really helping me is not only my psychiatrist, but I have a really strong support system. The same friend I talked about who knocked doors for Bernie with me is part of that support system. My boyfriend's part of that support system. My parents, and they help me get up every day. And my co-leader in Sunrise Movement Cedar Rapids, he texts me at 9 a.m. every day and says, how you doing? Which can get a little annoying sometimes, but it's really good for me. And so I hope that other people can find that support system that they need and realize they're going to get through it.
Beautiful. I think, you know, a lot of what's at the heart of this movement, or what's at the heart of, I think, you know, a lot of these organizations and activist groups is a sense of connecting with people who are like-minded, and people who, you know, and of course you build that friendship and relationship. And I'm glad that you have such a good, strong support system. So I think that that's amazing. And you absolutely are proof that you can get up every day and you can do what you need to do and and really do some amazing things. I mean, you've done amazing things. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on and for telling us about everything that you've done. I'd love to have you on again. Actually, let me find out a little bit more about, or I would just say, what would you like to tell people for ways that they can get involved?
Ways people can get involved. Number one, it is never too late to get involved. And number two, you are not too busy to get involved. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is not because I don't think that you're really busy, but because there are various levels of activism. You can do what works for your life. Mm-hmm. I have people who come to me and they're like, I just like either don't have the time or I'm not comfortable with like being in front of City Hall or trying to reach out to state representatives or talking in public. And I don't need that from people. I just need them to show up. I need them to show up to a meeting. I need them to make a social media post for us. Anything that supports the movement is equally important as, I don't know, me talking to you right now. And the reason for that is because numbers matter. If I had just come to City Hall by myself as an individual and said, I think that you need a climate resolution and I'm going to write it, they would laugh and they would say, no way. It was all about the people. It was all about the big march that we had. And people who came to that march aren't even a part of Sunrise Movement. They just came because they care about climate change and they care about their community. So I would just encourage people to start off small and see what you can do. I would say that it is the best way to accomplish any issue that you want to tackle, is to join an activist organization, to join a movement. Because like I said, we're talking about big structural change. I'm not talking about driving a hybrid. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about, I don't know, supporting, I don't know, just like these small steps that are important. It is important for us to change the culture and to live sustainable lifestyles. And that goes for other issues as well. I mean, support Black-owned businesses, do the important work, but also join the movements on the ground. Mm-hmm. And so I would encourage people to find either Sunrise Movement Cedar Rapids if you're in the area, or to find that important environmental group in your community and just follow them on Facebook. They will share the calls to action with you, and you can be a part of them as you're able. And then I would also really encourage people, if you're in the Cedar Rapids area, to follow the actions of Advocates for Social Justice, our local Black Lives Matter organization, which we partner with on a lot of things. And that's really important because in the same way as police brutality is a Black and brown people's issue, so is the climate crisis. And if we don't tackle these issues together, we're not going to get very far. So I just think that, that's part of the progressive movement, right? Is coming together and collaborating and realizing that we're all really fighting the same system of capitalism, white supremacy. We just all have different issues that maybe resonate with us. Mm-hmm. So yes, number one, find your local organization or activist movement on the issue that you really care about, and follow them on Facebook, follow them on Twitter, send out a message, get involved in some way, and of course vote. That is, all you're seeing on your timeline. But let me tell you, if I am trying to move a Democratic candidate over a Republican candidate, it makes my job a lot easier. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you everyone for watching the Up and Up. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I feel like I'm missing one. Oh, Twitter. Look us up on those. And if you would be so kind, please donate to us through Patreon /Real Progressives. This is Jodi from the Up and Up signing off.